god betrayed by his own brother, a love that defied death, and a rebirth that shaped the afterlife forever. The legend of Osiris is not just a myth, it is a tale of power, envy, and eternal justice that has echoed through time. But how did Osiris's murder lead to his eternal rule over the dead? What made his story the cornerstone of ancient Egyptian belief, shaping their understanding of life, death, and the afterlife? The answers lie deep within one of the most captivating myths of human history, a story where love triumphs over death and justice transcends mortality. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egyptian mythology, Osiris stands as a symbol of life, death, and resurrection. His story, rich with divine drama, was more than a legend. It was a spiritual blueprint that guided the Egyptians' view of the afterlife. To the ancient Egyptians, life was a fleeting moment, but death was the beginning of an eternal journey. Central to this journey was Osiris, the just king who, through his death and rebirth, became the ultimate judge of souls. His myth provided hope, the promise that life continued beyond the grave and that righteousness would be rewarded in the next world. But Osiris's path to becoming the ruler of the underworld was paved with treachery and loss. The gods of Egypt were more than distant deities. They were rulers, siblings, and rivals, and their conflicts shaped the world. At the heart of Osiris's story lies his own brother, Set, whose burning envy set the wheels of fate in motion. Set's betrayal would plunge the divine family into turmoil, sending Osiris into the underworld and Isis, his beloved queen, on a desperate quest to restore him. Yet from death, Osiris would find his greatest power, not as a king among the living, but as an eternal guide for the souls of the dead. Through this epic, we will uncover the rise of Osiris, his tragic fall, and his triumphant return, not to life, but to immortality. His myth became the foundation of Egyptian religion, inspiring rituals, tombs, and even the famous belief in judgment after death. But to truly understand his legacy, we must start from the beginning, where envy met betrayal and love defied the grave. In the beginning, when the earth was young and the sky cradled the stars, 4 divine siblings were born from the eternal embrace of Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. These 4 gods were destined to shape the world, but it was Osiris, the eldest, who rose above them all, beloved by both mortals and gods. He was not only a king, he was the bringer of life, the embodiment of order, and the first to teach humanity the sacred balance between the earth and the heavens. The gods crowned him ruler of Egypt, the land where the Nile carved a path of life through the golden sands. Under Osiris's reign, the earth flourished. He taught humanity the sacred secrets of the Nile, showing them how its cycles of flooding could be harnessed to grow grain and feed their people. Where once there was wilderness, Osiris created fields ripe with barley and wheat. He taught them the art of irrigation, ensuring that the river's life-giving waters reached every field. Under his rule, hunger became a stranger, and Egypt bloomed into a kingdom of abundance. But his gifts to humanity extended beyond the fields. Osiris became the architect of civilization itself, teaching his people how to build cities, craft tools, and weave cloth. He established laws, bringing order to chaos and justice to disputes. His voice became the voice of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance, ensuring that fairness and kindness ruled the land. Even the dead found comfort under his rule, for he introduced the sacred rites of burial, teaching that through proper ritual, the soul could live on in the afterlife. Osiris, to the people, was not just a king, he was a father, a guide, and a protector. At his side always was his beloved Isis, his queen, his equal, and the goddess of magic, healing, and fertility. Isis was more than a consort, she was his partner in every sense, revered for her wisdom and unmatched power in the divine arts. She walked among the people, teaching them how to care for the sick, honor their families, and weave the fabric of society with compassion and duty. She taught the women of Egypt the secrets of medicine and motherhood, while her magic safeguarded the kingdom from harm. Their union was more than love, it was the perfect balance of masculine strength and feminine power, a bond so deep that even death would one day fail to break it. But where there was light, darkness crept in the shadows. Watching this golden era with growing bitterness was Set, Osiris's younger brother. and the god of storms, deserts, and chaos. Set was a force of raw power, a warrior who ruled the harsh, barren deserts that lay beyond Osiris's fertile lands. His dominion was wild and untamed, winds that tore through dunes, storms that shattered trees, and the relentless sun that cracked the earth. But power without love is a hollow crown, and Set ruled alone, his kingdom a place of emptiness and desolation. As the people of Egypt praised Osiris's name, building temples and offering gifts in his honor, Set's heart darkened with envy. He watched from the shadows as his brother was adored not only by mortals but by the gods themselves. He saw Isis, radiant and powerful, ruling beside Osiris with devotion, and he felt the sting of his own loneliness. The world celebrated Osiris as the bringer of life, but where was Set's glory? Where were the songs sung in his name? The god of storms, who could split mountains with his power, felt himself diminished in the shadow of his brother's light. At first, Set tried to match his brother's greatness through conquest, waging war against the wild forces of the desert and the beasts that roamed it. But while Osiris brought life, Set could only bring destruction. Where Osiris built, Set destroyed. Where Osiris united, Set divided. And so, praise for Set never came, only fear. His temples were places of warning rather than worship. He became a god to be appeased, not adored. With each festival held in Osiris's honor, Set's resentment grew sharper. The applause, the laughter, the golden crowns, none were his. He was forced to smile at his brother's victories, his hands clenched beneath the banquet table. The wine tasted of bitterness. The music sounded like mockery. His heart became a crucible of anger, and from that anger, a plan began to take shape. Osiris, in his wisdom, did not see the gathering storm. He ruled with trust, not suspicion, for he believed that love could conquer envy, and that his brother would share in his joy rather than resent it. He welcomed Set to every feast, shared his bounty, and even gave him lands within his kingdom. But for Set, every gift was an insult, a reminder that he was always second, always the lesser. The people of Egypt, unknowingly, fed Set's hatred. They celebrated Osiris not only as a king, but as a god walking among them. They spoke of him with reverence, their voices rising in prayers of gratitude. But for Set, those prayers sounded like curses. He became obsessed with one thought. Why should Osiris, who had no army, no deserts to tame, and no storms to conquer, hold all the power? And then came a whisper, one that Set could not silence. What if the throne were his? What if the people called his name instead? What if Osiris, with all his love and all his gifts, were gone? The seed of envy had grown into something monstrous, a hunger not just for power, but for obliteration. Set would not merely take the throne. He would erase his brother's name from history. The Nile would run red before Set would bow to him any longer. But Osiris, ever the bringer of life, could not see the death that approached from within his own family. He could not imagine that the greatest threat to his kingdom was not chaos, not famine, not war, but the cold hatred of his own blood. The golden age of Osiris was about to end. The feast of his betrayal was already being prepared. And in the shadows, Set waited, his heart black with envy, his hands ready to strike, and his soul burning with the desire to see his brother fall. The golden age of Osiris was doomed long before the first blow was struck. In the shadows of the throne, Set's envy had rotted into hatred, a venom that seeped through his soul, twisting love for his brother into a desire for his destruction. No longer content to brood in silence, Set resolved that the crown of Egypt would be his, no matter the cost, no matter the blood spilled. Yet, he would not strike with a sword or declare open war. Now, his weapon would be treachery, and his battlefield, a celebration. Set began to weave his trap with the cunning of a serpent. He summoned the finest artisans in Egypt, demanding they craft something both magnificent and deadly. Under his command, they built a coffin unlike any the world had seen, fashioned from cedar, inlaid with gold, and adorned with precious stones that sparkled like the stars. It was a masterpiece, a work of art, and yet it was a prison. Set had designed the coffin not for glory but for murder. He had measured it in secret, ensuring that it would fit only one body perfectly, the body of Osiris. With his trap prepared, Set declared a great banquet in his brother's honor, inviting gods, nobles, and mortals alike to feast in the palace. The air buzzed with joy. Music, laughter, and the scent of wine filled the grand hall. Osiris, ever trusting, sat at the head of the table, unaware that his death dined beside him. Even Isis, with all her wisdom, did not sense the treachery in Set's smile. As the night wore on and wine loosened the guests' spirits, Set rose and clapped his hands, silencing the room. "Let us play a game, my friends," he declared, his voice warm, his grin wide. Servants entered, carrying the exquisite coffin, and gasps of awe filled the hall. "Behold this splendid chest," Set proclaimed, his eyes glinting. "To the one who fits it best, I shall give it as a gift." The guests, merry with wine and eager for sport, accepted the challenge. One by one, they stepped into the coffin, laughing as they tried to squeeze or stretch to fit its shape. But the chest was either too large or too small. It belonged to no one. With every failed attempt, Set's smile sharpened, for he knew the game's victor was already chosen. Finally, amid the laughter and cheers, Osiris himself stepped forward. Ever a man of joy and generosity, he could not refuse his brother's game. "Let me try, dear brother, though I fear your prize will be wasted on me," he said, his voice filled with warmth, unaware that he spoke his own eulogy. Osiris lay down in the coffin, and the room grew still. It fit him perfectly, as though it had been crafted from his very body. And before the smile could fade from his lips, Set struck. With a roar he slammed the heavy lid down, and the sound was like thunder crashing through the hall. Locks clicked, nails were driven in, swift, merciless, final. The laughter died, the music stopped, terror spread across the faces of the guests. But Set's eyes burned with triumph. "Behold the end of the Golden King," he bellowed, his voice cold with victory. "The throne is mine." The gods cried out in shock, but none dared to move. The guards, loyal to Set or paralyzed with fear, blocked every path. Isis, her heart breaking, screamed her husband's name and rushed forward, but Set's warriors seized her, holding her back as she fought with the fury of a lioness. The coffin, with Osiris trapped inside, alive, sealed, and suffocating, was carried to the river Nile. Set, towering and merciless, stood at the riverbank. "You ruled the land, my brother. Now rule the waters if you can." And with a mighty shove, he cast the coffin into the current. The Nile, once Osiris's lifeblood, became his tomb. The waters swallowed the golden chest, and with it the heart of Egypt. The river carried its king far from the land he had blessed, far from the throne he had built, and far from the queen who loved him. As the ripples faded, Set turned to the stunned assembly and declared himself king of Egypt. "Osiris is no more. The Nile has claimed him, and the throne is mine by right." His voice was thunderous, his power absolute. And though the gods watched in horror, they did not strike him down, for fate had begun a story that even the gods could not stop. But Set, in his arrogance, had made a fatal mistake. He believed that death was the end. He did not understand that Osiris's greatest power was not in life, but in what would come after. The Nile carried Osiris away, but it could not carry him beyond the reach of love. On the riverbank, Isis fell to her knees, her wail piercing the heavens and shaking the earth. The gods themselves mourned, for they had witnessed not only the murder of a king, but the shattering of a bond so pure that even death could not sever it. Yet grief did not break Isis, it forged her. Her tears fell, but behind them burned an unshakable resolve. Osiris would not be lost to the waters. She would find him, no matter how far he had drifted. Driven by devotion, Isis began her journey across Egypt, a queen stripped of her throne but not her power. She searched every bend of the Nile, every marsh, every hidden inlet. Days became weeks, and weeks turned to months. Her beauty faded under the sun's harsh gaze, her feet cracked on the burning sands, but her spirit burned brighter than the desert sky. The winds carried her cries, and the creatures of the earth, the birds, the jackals, the serpents, became her allies. But the path was not without peril. Set, fearing Isis's determination, sent his spies and servants to hinder her search. Sandstorms rose without warning, and false rumors of Osiris's resting place lured her into traps. Serpents struck from the shadows, sent by Set's command, but Isis's magic, ancient and mighty, turned their venom to water. When bandits sought to rob her, she spoke a single word, and their swords turned to dust. Yet, for all her power, the greatest battle she fought was with despair. The Nile, vast and unforgiving, seemed determined to keep it secret. But Isis pressed on, because to love Osiris was to defy the impossible. Her journey took her beyond the borders of Egypt to a distant land ruled by a mighty king. There, hidden within the trunk of a towering tamarisk tree, Osiris lay entombed. The tree had grown around the golden coffin, cradling him within its heart. The king of Byblos, unaware of the treasure within, had felled the tree and placed it in his palace as a pillar, a symbol of strength, unknowingly built upon death. Isis, her heart pounding with recognition, entered the palace in disguise. She did not arrive as a goddess but as a nursemaid, veiling her divine nature in humility. The queen of Byblos, moved by her grace, entrusted her with the care of her infant son. Each night, while the palace slept, Isis worked her magic, surrounding the child with protective flames to grant him immortality. But it was not immortality that she truly sought. It was the pillar that stood silent, holding the one she loved. One night, the queen discovered Isis's ritual and, misunderstanding her intent, cried out in fear. The spell broke, and the flames vanished. But Isis, now revealed in her divine form, stood before the royal family, radiant and sorrowful. "I am Isis, daughter of the sky and earth," she declared, "and within your halls my beloved sleeps in a tomb of wood. Let him be returned to me, and your child shall know my blessing for all his days." The king, awed and repentant, ordered the pillar to be cut open. The tree surrendered its treasure, the golden coffin of Osiris, untouched and sacred. Isis, with trembling hands, laid her palm upon the cold surface and whispered, "I have found you, my heart. The river could not keep you. The earth could not hide you. I am here." With the coffin reclaimed, Isis began the long journey back to Egypt. She traveled swiftly, hiding from Set's gaze, knowing his wrath would burn the land if he discovered her prize. She rested only in the shadows, cradling the coffin as though it still held Osiris's warmth. She did not yet know that her journey was only half complete, that Set's cruelty had not yet reached its end. But in that moment, the world felt still. The stars watched as Isis crossed the deserts, and the Nile, which had once stolen her beloved, now guided her home. The winds whispered of her triumph, and the earth, which had cradled her tears, now carried her steps. For Isis had taught the world a truth that even the gods could not deny. Love does not end in death, it begins there. The winds of the Nile carried whispers of Isis's triumph, and those whispers reached the ears of Set, igniting his rage into an inferno. He had believed his victory complete, that Osiris was lost forever beneath the river's waves. But now he learned that his brother's body had returned, cradled in the arms of the woman whose love defied even death. Set, the god of storms, felt his power tremble before the force of Isis's devotion. And in his heart, fury gave birth to a new, darker resolve. If Isis had reclaimed Osiris, then Set would destroy him beyond all repair. With the violence of a tempest, Set descended upon the marshes, tearing through the reeds with the force of his storming winds. Isis, sensing the coming danger, tried to shield Osiris's body, but Set was merciless. His eyes burned with madness as he seized his brother's lifeless form. "So you return, my brother?" he snarled, his voice thick with hate. "Then let me ensure you never return again." Then, with a cruelty that shook the heavens, Set raised his blade and tore Osiris's body apart, limb from limb, piece from piece, until his brother was no longer whole, but shattered into 14 fragments. Blood soaked the earth, and the sky wept with rain as the gods turned their faces away. This was no death, it was obliteration, an unmaking of a god. But Set's malice did not end with destruction. He knew that as long as Isis could gather the body, her magic could restore life. So he took the pieces of his brother's body and scattered them across the length of Egypt, from the mountains to the deltas, from the deserts to the depths of the Nile. Each piece was cast into a different corner of the land, lost among rivers, buried in sands, or swallowed by beasts. And when his work was done, Set stood atop the broken earth and declared himself the sole ruler of Egypt. The land, wounded and mourning, fell under his shadow, but grief did not break Isis, it forged her. The sight of her beloved torn apart, his body desecrated, became fuel for her resolve. Set had not destroyed Osiris, he had only multiplied her purpose. She would not mourn, she would search, she would fight, and she would gather every piece of him from the corners of the world. Knowing that her task could not be done alone, Isis called upon her sister, Nephthys. Though Nephthys was Set's wife, her heart belonged to justice and love, and she despised her husband's cruelty. Together, the two goddesses became a force that even Set could not stop, a huntress and a healer, a seeker and a sorceress. Their journey was one of both magic and hardship. Isis flew across the sky with wings of a kite, her cries echoing through the winds. Nephthys scoured the earth, walking through shadows and speaking with spirits. They searched the forests and the mountains, the rivers and the tombs. They asked the creatures of Egypt for aid, the crocodiles, the jackals, the falcons, and all, honoring the king they had loved, became their allies. Piece by piece, they reclaimed Osiris. In Abydos they found his head, guarded by a serpent who, in grief, had become its eternal protector. Isis, with a whisper of gratitude, calmed the serpent and took the head, promising that Osiris would rise. In Heliopolis, they found his heart, pulsing faintly with the memory of life. Isis held it close to her chest, her own heart beating in rhythm with his. In the delta marshes, Nephthys pulled his legs from the riverbed, the reeds bending in reverence. From the caves of the western desert, they took his arms, buried beneath stones, placed there by desert spirits who honored the fallen god. But their search was not without peril. Set's forces hunted them. Shapeshifters, demons of the wind and serpents born from shadow. They attacked at every turn, hoping to stop the sisters from restoring the god. But Isis's magic was the oldest in the world, woven from the stars and the moon. She spoke words that bound spirits and broke curses. And when the enemy pressed too hard, Nephthys became the guardian, wielding her staff with the ferocity of a lioness. Yet despite their strength, one piece eluded them, the final piece, Osiris's phallus. Set, in his greatest cruelty, had cast it into the waters of the Nile, where it was swallowed by a fish. It was gone, beyond even Isis's power to retrieve. But Isis, undeterred, used her magic to create what was lost, an act of power, creation, and defiance. She did not need the flesh. She held the essence of Osiris within her, and it was with that essence that she would perform her greatest act of magic. At last, with 13 pieces of Osiris reassembled, Isis and Nephthys performed the ancient rites. Isis breathed life into his form, not as a mortal man, but as something more. And in that sacred union, Isis conceived a child, Horus, the falcon, the avenger, the son who would one day challenge Set for the throne. Osiris opened his eyes, not to the world of the living, but to the realm beyond it. He could not remain among the living, for he was now something greater, the bridge between life and death, the first to conquer mortality and rise as the ruler of the afterlife. But before he descended into the underworld, he spoke to Isis. "Our son will bring justice, and I shall await the souls of the righteous to give them what Set has denied, eternal life." The earth trembled, for the balance had shifted. Set had shattered the body, but Isis had forged a soul unbreakable. And though Set sat upon the throne of Egypt, his reign was built on borrowed time. For in Isis's womb, vengeance stirred, and the wings of the falcon were already beating toward war. The world stood still as Isis knelt beside the broken form of Osiris, her beloved husband, gathered from the farthest corners of the earth. The pieces of his body, stitched together through pain, love, and sorcery, lay before her, complete, yet lifeless. But Isis, the goddess of magic, was not finished. She had crossed deserts, battled shadows, and defied death itself. Now she would perform a miracle, the greatest act of creation the world had ever seen. The air thickened with power as Isis spread her arms and began to chant, her voice weaving through the fabric of existence. She called upon Ra, the sun god, drawing light from the heavens to warm Osiris's cold form. She invoked Thoth, god of wisdom, to guide her spells with ancient knowledge. She pleaded with Anubis, the guardian of the dead, to stay his hand and grant Osiris safe passage back from the veil. The sky darkened, and a wind, neither warm nor cold, swirled around her. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. A brilliant light, pure and golden, erupted from Isis's hands. The wounds on Osiris's body sealed, the pallor of death faded from his skin, and color, life, returned to his form. His chest, still and silent for so long, suddenly rose, and then a breath. The first since Set had stolen his life. His eyes, emerald and ancient, opened, meeting Isis's tear-filled gaze. Osiris had returned, not as a shadow or a memory, but as a god reborn through love and magic. But as he rose, the truth of his resurrection became clear. This was not life as it had been. His body, though whole, was no longer meant for the mortal world. He felt it, a distance, a separation, like standing between two realms. The power that brought him back tethered him to something beyond the land of the living. The scales of the universe had shifted, and Osiris, once a king among mortals, had become something else entirely, an eternal being, bound to the mysteries beyond death. In that fleeting moment, Isis, though filled with joy, felt the ache of parting. She had brought him back, but she could not keep him. Yet from their union, something precious was born, a seed of hope that would reshape destiny. In the radiance of their reunion, Isis conceived a son, a child who carried the strength of his father and the magic of his mother. His name would be Horus, and through him, justice would return to the world. Osiris, though he could not remain by Isis's side, spoke with the voice of prophecy. "Through Horus, my bloodline endures, and through him, my throne will be reclaimed. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth shall continue, and the balance shall be restored." His duty, however, lay elsewhere. As the first god to pass through death and return, Osiris became the rightful ruler of the underworld, the Duat. It was a kingdom not of darkness, but of passage, a place where every soul would journey after death. There, he would reign not as a king of the living, but as a judge of the dead. With Anubis, his loyal guide, by his side, Osiris took his place upon a great throne, facing the scales of Ma'at, the cosmic order. It would be he who judged every soul, weighing their hearts against the feather of truth. The wicked he would cast into darkness. The righteous he would guide to Aru, the field of reeds, a paradise of eternal peace. But though he ruled the realm beyond, Osiris's heart remained with his family. He would watch as Isis protected their unborn son, as Horus grew into a warrior, and as the time came for the child to challenge his uncle, Set. Through Horus, his legacy would rise. Through his rule in the underworld, the promise of justice would endure. He was no longer a king of one land, but a god of all worlds, the living, the dead, and the eternal. The winds of destiny carried the cries of a child born from both grief and hope. Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, heir to a shattered throne and the last hope to avenge his father. From the moment of his birth, Horus was marked by fate, destined to confront his uncle Set, the usurper who had cast Egypt into shadow. But Set's wrath was boundless, and he sought to destroy the child before he could grow into a threat. Thus, Isis, the ever-protective mother, hid Horus deep within the marshes of the Nile, cloaking him with magic and raising him far from the reach of Set's spies. In the secrecy of the reeds, Horus grew strong, his body forged by hardship and his heart hardened by purpose. He learned to hunt from the hawks and fight from the lions, and his mother taught him the sacred arts of magic and healing, ensuring he was both a warrior and a protector. But beyond the skills of combat, Isis instilled in him the truth of his destiny. You are not born for revenge, but for justice. Reclaim the throne, not for power, but for balance. When the time came, Horus emerged, a god no longer a boy, but a warrior with the eyes of a falcon and the wings of vengeance. His voice thundered across the land as he stood before Set's court, challenging his uncle for the crown that was his by birthright. "You stole my father's life, but you will not steal his legacy. Face me, Set, if you dare." Set, proud and cruel, laughed at the challenge. "Do you think a child can dethrone a god of storms? Come then, let us see whose strength commands the sky." And so the battle for Egypt began. A war not of armies, but of gods. Their first clash shook the earth as they fought upon the sands of Egypt, where the desert winds screamed and the dunes became their weapons. Set, the god of storms, hurled tempests and lightning, tearing the sky apart. But Horus, swift and precise, struck with the speed of a falcon, his spear cutting through the storm. From the earth, their battle soared into the sky. They became two mighty forms, the falcon and the beast, wings and claws, storms and shadows. They fought among the clouds, and the sun turned to darkness from their fury. Set, in his rage, grabbed Horus by the wing and flung him into the Nile, hoping to drown his challenge beneath the sacred waters. But the Nile, ever loyal to Osiris, carried Horus upon its waves, healing his wounds and lifting him once more to the sky. Then came the fiercest battle, on the Nile itself, where the river churned with their struggle. Horus, with eyes burning like the sun, summoned the power of Ra, and his spear became a ray of pure light. He struck Set with such force that the waters split and the land trembled. But Set, cunning and relentless, struck back with shadows and chaos. In the heat of their struggle, Set gouged out one of Horus's eyes, hoping to blind him and end the fight. But Horus, though wounded, refused to fall. With one eye he saw his pain, with the other he saw his purpose. The battle raged for days, for years, until the earth and sky could bear it no longer. The gods themselves intervened, calling both warriors to stand before the divine tribunal, with Ra, the sun god, as their judge. There, in the halls of Ma'at, the gods weighed the claims. Horus, the son of the rightful king, demanding justice, and Set, the powerful ruler who claimed dominion by conquest. The gods debated. Some argued that Horus was the rightful heir, but others feared Set's power and the chaos that could follow his fall. The council dragged on, and the balance of power hung on the edge of a feather. But then Horus, though scarred and weary, stepped forward and did what no one expected. He spoke not only of vengeance but of order. "Let Set live," he declared, "but let him be banished to the deserts, the land that suits his nature. The throne of Egypt is not mine alone, but for Ma'at, truth, justice, and balance." The gods fell silent, for in Horus's mercy they saw his father's wisdom and his mother's heart. At last, Ra rose and declared, "Horus, son of Osiris, your father's throne is yours. You have proven not only your strength, but your justice. Egypt is yours to rule." Defeated, Set was exiled to the barren deserts, where his storms would rage forever, but he would rule no more. His power was broken, but not his existence, for the gods knew that chaos could never be destroyed, only balanced by order. And so, Horus ascended the throne of Egypt, a king not born from conquest, but from righteousness. His first act was to restore his father's name. Temples rose, and songs of Osiris filled the air. The people rejoiced, for under Horus's rule, the land bloomed, the Nile flowed, and peace returned to Egypt. Yet the greatest act of Horus was not on the battlefield, but in the heavens. He offered his restored eye, the eye of Horus, a symbol of healing, protection, and power, to his father, Osiris. And from the underworld, Osiris received the gift, his spirit forever watching over the land. With Set's defeat and Horus's reign, balance, Ma'at, was restored. Life, death, chaos, and order, the eternal cycle continued, but Egypt stood firm under the rule of the Falcon King, the son of the resurrected god. In the realm beyond mortal sight, where the sun dipped below the horizon and entered the unseen, Osiris reigned, not as a king of the living, but as a god of the dead, the first to conquer death and return with dominion over it. Upon a throne of shadowed gold in the heart of the Duat, the underworld, Osiris presided over the fate of every soul that crossed into eternity. His skin, emerald as the fertile earth, and his crown, tall and regal, marked him not only as a ruler, but as a guardian of justice. Once a mortal king, he had become something eternal, the judge of souls, the keeper of balance, and the gatekeeper of paradise. In his presence, every soul would face the weighing of the heart, the sacred trial that decided their fate in the afterlife. Before him stood the scales of Ma'at, the cosmic order of truth and justice. On one side, the feather of Ma'at, light and pure. On the other, the heart of the deceased, heavy with deeds and desires. Anubis, the jackal-headed guide, brought the souls forward, while Thoth, the god of wisdom, recorded the verdict. Osiris watched with eyes that pierced through lies, and if a heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was welcomed into the field of reeds, Aru, a paradise where life continued in eternal peace. But if the heart weighed heavy with sin and deceit, it was devoured by Ammit, the soul eater, and the spirit was condemned to eternal oblivion. Thus, Osiris became more than a god. He became a symbol of justice, reward, and consequence. His judgment was fair and unyielding, but it was not cruel. To the Egyptians, he was not a distant ruler, but a protector, a shepherd of the dead, ensuring that those who lived righteously would find eternal joy. He was not a god of death in the sense of destruction. He was a god of resurrection, transformation, and continuation. Through him, death was no longer an end but a transition, a door to a life beyond life. The myth of Osiris wove itself into the very fabric of Egyptian belief and burial practices. To the Egyptians, every man and woman could become like Osiris in death, reborn and eternal if they followed his path. They modeled their funerary rites upon his story, believing that as he was dismembered and reassembled, they too could be resurrected through careful preservation of the body. Thus, the rituals of mummification emerged, a sacred process of preserving the body so that the soul, Ka, could recognize and reunite with it in the afterlife. Priests, acting as Isis and Anubis, performed these rites, reciting spells from the Book of the Dead, guiding the soul safely through the dangers of the Duat. Tombs became more than resting places. They became portals to eternity, filled with offerings, treasures, and inscriptions meant to help the deceased on their journey. The walls of these tombs told the story of Osiris, his death, his resurrection, and his reign, because his myth was not only a story but a promise. Live justly, and you will rise as he did. Pharaohs, believing themselves to be the living Horus, sought to become Osiris in death, continuing the cycle of kingship and divinity. The pyramid texts, coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead all carried his name, his prayers, and his power, an eternal guide for the living and the dead alike. But the legacy of Osiris transcended temples and tombs. It became a cornerstone of Egyptian philosophy about life itself. His myth taught that order, truth, and justice, ma'at, were the highest virtues. Just as Osiris ruled the underworld with fairness, so too were the living expected to govern their lives with balance and compassion. Life was a trial, and death was a judgment, but the reward was eternal. His story reminded Egyptians that even through destruction, there could be rebirth. Through loss, there could be legacy, and through death, there could be life everlasting. The power of Osiris's myth endured not only in Egypt but far beyond its borders. As time passed, his image transformed from a purely Egyptian deity to a universal symbol of life, death, and resurrection. The Greeks identified him with Dionysus, seeing in him the same cycle of death and rebirth. His legend, carried through trade and conquest, influenced spiritual beliefs across the ancient world. Even centuries later, echoes of Osiris's journey would inspire myths, philosophies, and religions that spoke of eternal life and the triumph of the soul over death. Yet, through all time, Osiris remained what he had always been: a king who brought life, a husband who inspired devotion, and a god who offered hope. His throne in the Duat was eternal, but his greatest kingdom was the hearts of those who believed in him. In life, he ruled Egypt. In death, he ruled eternity. But through his myth, he ruled something greater still: the promise that no soul is ever truly lost and no life ever truly ends. The story of Osiris is more than myth. It is the beating heart of ancient Egypt's understanding of life, death, and what lies beyond. From his reign as a just king to his betrayal and tragic death, from his resurrection through Isis's undying love to his ascension as the eternal judge of souls, Osiris's journey became the blueprint for every soul's passage through the afterlife. But his tale is not only about gods and kings, it is about us. It is a story of love that defies mortality, of justice that outlives cruelty, and of life that continues beyond the grave. Through his myth, the Egyptians found hope that death was not the end, but a doorway. Every pharaoh who ruled was seen as Horus on earth, destined to become Osiris in death, a part of the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Every burial rite, every tomb, every inscription whispered the same promise: as Osiris rose, so too could the righteous. It was a belief so powerful that it transcended time, inspiring not only a civilization but a legacy that endured for millennia. But perhaps the most enduring lesson of Osiris's story is that true immortality lies not in power or conquest, but in love, sacrifice, and justice. Set wielded strength and seized thrones, but he faded into the desert winds. Osiris, who lost his life but not his virtue, became eternal, not for what he took, but for what he gave. And through his son, Horus, he reclaimed more than a kingdom. He restored balance, proving that evil, though it may reign, cannot rule forever. Today, the legend of Osiris still speaks to us, reminding us that every end holds the seed of a new beginning. Death may come for kings and empires, but legacy, built on love, justice, and sacrifice, lives forever. In Osiris, we see the ultimate truth: What is broken can be made whole, what is lost can be found, and what dies can live again. So, as the sun sets beyond the Nile and rises again each morning, remember this. Like Osiris, we are all part of an eternal cycle. Our deeds shape our afterlife. Our love outlives our bodies, and our stories, if told well, never truly end. If you found this journey through the myth of Osiris captivating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that bridge the worlds of legend, history, and the timeless human spirit. And remember, though empires fall and kings fade, stories endure forever.